come back to the original point that I was making. It's not just a question of finding the troops, the weapons, the vehicles, the armored vehicles, if you like, to put their soldiers into the field. It is this question of support and the enabling functions, which we would have to look still to the Americans to provide. Now, over time, this could change, but it's not going to change very quickly. And it would be highly irresponsible. And I'm sure Donald Trump or J.D. Vance are not thinking down these tracks to precipitately and rapidly withdraw American troops, American capability from Europe. It's not justified, it's not necessary, and frankly, it would be endangering not only the security of Ukraine, but endangering the security of Europe in a way when they might have to find themselves being forced to re-intervene.
Well, joining us now is Lord Dannatt, former head of the army. He's been listening very closely and following very closely all of these twists and turns. And of course, we heard earlier that President Zelensky has called for an army of Europe now. And we know that Donald Tusk has been tweeting, saying that he looks like he's in favour of this. But Lord Dannatt obviously has some quite interesting and important views about the state of the UK military and its, any future peacekeeping that it could do in Ukraine or anywhere else around the world. And I'm delighted that he joins me now. Lord Dannatt, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Very, very happy to join you.
Do you think that if a situation arose where Britain had to step up and offer some kind of peacekeeping army or peacekeeping mission, do we have the capacity and do we have the men and women to do that?
Well, you ask a very important question here, and I think I'll answer it in the wider context of what's been mooted over the last few hours, which is the creation of a European army or a European defence force. And that rather presupposes that the Americans are going to substantially walk away from NATO. I think to answer that second question first, I'm afraid, as seductive as it might seem, I'm not in favour of going down the track of creating a European defence force. This is not a binary issue. Do we have a European defence force or do we stay part of NATO? NATO is our primary defence alliance, our primary defence arrangement, and it's really critical that the Americans stay in it. Now, with all the other challenges around the world, in the Indo-Pacific and in the Middle East, it's inevitable and perfectly reasonable that the Americans would want to dial down the amount of support that they're going to give European countries and dial up what they're going to do elsewhere. But dialing up and dialing down is very different to actually opting out. And the really critical issue is that if we tried to put together in short order a European defence force that could play a meaningful peacekeeping role, and it would be a substantial force, we couldn't do it very quickly overnight without American support, without American transport aircraft, without intelligence and American intelligence capability, American logistics support. There are many enablers, as we the military would call it, that we would depend, certainly initially and maybe into the medium term, on America to provide. Now, if over time European countries' defence budgets are increased such that we can supply these enablers more for ourselves as Europeans, well, that's a way forward. But if there is to be a ceasefire agreed sometime soon in Ukraine and a demand for an intermediary force, a peacekeeping force to go in, yes, European countries could supply quite a lot of the manpower, but we would be dependent fairly significantly on these American enablers. So there isn't a binary issue here.
So that's really interesting to hear that. So you're basically saying that, look, in the short term, it's very difficult to pull together a substantive peacekeeping mission without America. Now, America has signalled that it wants to, in fact, one of the announcements we were expecting from J.D. Vance yesterday, his speech went in a different direction, was an announcement signalling the possible withdrawal of American forces from Europe. If that is the case, what will then happen? Do European countries have enough military manpower to put a peacekeeping mission together?
Well, it's not just a question of numbers, and frankly, numbers would be a challenge. As far as the British Army is concerned, now at its smallest size for for many decades, indeed for a couple of centuries, with all the other commitments that the British Army is meeting around the world on various missions, we would struggle to put our share into the field of that peacekeeping force. Now, I don't know what our share would be, but given the many hundreds of kilometers of front line that would need to be policed, I can see European countries looking to the UK to provide something around 5 to 10,000 of those troops. Well, we would really struggle to do that without a rapid increase or mobilization of our small reserves, or a rapid increase in our regular forces. But I come back to the original point that I was making. It's not just a question of finding the troops, the weapons, the vehicles, the armored vehicles, if you like, to put their soldiers into the field. It is this question of support and the enabling functions, which we would have to look still to the Americans to provide. Now, over time, this could change, but it's not going to change very quickly. And it would be highly irresponsible. And I'm sure Donald Trump or J.D. Vance are not thinking down these tracks to precipitately and rapidly withdraw American troops, American capability from Europe. It's not justified, it's not necessary. And frankly, it would be endangering not only the security of Ukraine, but endangering the security of Europe in a way when they might have to find themselves being forced to re-intervene. So this has got to be done in a measured way over time. But there's no getting away from it. And I and others have said this so many times in the last few years. We are not spending enough in this country and in most other European countries on our defence to give ourselves the capability that we need to carry out the tasks that are in front of us. Frankly, we've taken too many peace dividends since the end of the Cold War, and the birds of risk are coming home to roost big time.
And, you know, you've made the case about defence spending. It was interesting. We covered this on my show yesterday, and I was really surprised in a positive way how many of my listeners were messaging in saying, yes, we absolutely have to put more money towards defence, and that has to be ring-fenced. But in terms of troop numbers, I mean, the Times did an interesting study this week all across the paper looking at the younger generation. Would they be prepared to fight for their country? And the answer was absolutely no. We know that the armed forces does struggle to recruit people. If we are moving into a different phase, you know, in terms of our geopolitics and in terms of, from a military point of view, and we may well be looking at, you know, having to be more active, how are we going to have a conversation with the public about encouraging people to come into the army, or even having to think about conscription, or what do we do about that sort of side of things?
Well, I think the first thing is that the government has got to change the narrative. They've got to change the way that we are talking about defence. Defence is seen as a poor cousin. There's an awful lot of perfectly reasonable emphasis on health and social care, on schools, on hospitals, on national infrastructure. There's got to be a dialing up of the dialogue, of the narrative on our security and the importance of having defence forces that can protect our people abroad and our territorial integrity at home. And that's a responsibility of government to do. And it's going to cost money. And okay, if it's going to cost money, where does it come from? Well, one answer is that government has got to reprioritise and spend less on other things and more on defence. But the stark truth is that if we are facing a stark security challenge, then we may all have to put our hands in our pockets, both rich and poor and medium-sized income people, to actually pay more in taxes to provide what is needed. That's genuine burden sharing, and it may well have to be done. You can't get away from the fact that when Donald Trump recently talked about countries should be spending 5% of GDP on defence, that wasn't a figure he just plucked out of the air. That's what we were spending in the mid-late 1980s in this country on defence. And that was the price we were paying for deterrence. And it was the price that we paid willingly to prevent the Cold War from becoming hot. And we may well have to go back to those sorts of figures, not just 2.5%, but 3.5%, 4%, maybe even towards 5% over time, not immediately, but over time on defence, to make sure we've got the capability that we can play our part as European members of NATO in our collective security for Europe.
And just pick up that second part of that question, just about how do you get particularly young people to get involved and join the armed forces? Or are we going to have to get to a point where maybe down the track we're going to have to try and force people to get involved?
Well, conscription is not something we've generally had in this country, and we had it in the First and Second World Wars, of course, and we had it briefly from 1949 to 1963. So it's not a normal part of British life. But what the government has to do is to make the case for why a peacekeeping operation, such as we might have to get involved in Ukraine, is important to the security of Europe and to the security of this country, and appeal to people to want to come forward and to serve their country. Now, there's an element of inducement of making sure that the pay is suitable, that the weapons and equipment that people are given is palpably suitable for the task. So there are many dimensions to this. And I'm afraid I don't run with this Generation Z not willing to fight. In the 1930s, the young people at Oxbridge said that they wouldn't fight. But come the day, come the moment, people will. But it's down to the mood music from Whitehall, it's the narrative from Whitehall, it's the messages that are sent out that people have got to understand this isn't something for other people over there. This is something that actually matters for us. And we've all got to put our shoulders to the wheel and get stuck in.
Lord Dannatt, really interesting to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Lord Dannatt, there, former head of the Army.